Las Vegas is a city built on illusions, and no illusion was grander or more meticulously crafted than the Onyx. It wasn't just a casino, it was a monument to power, a sleek black tower of glass and steel that pierced the desert sky, consuming the neon glow of the Strip and reflecting it back as a cold, predatory shimmer. Inside, the air was a carefully calibrated cocktail of oxygen, expensive perfume, and the electric thrill of ruinous hope. Every chip, every card, every drop of whiskey, and every whispered secret within its walls belonged to one man, Marco, the architect, Moretti. To the public, Marco was a reclusive, brilliant hotelier. To the FBI and the hushed inner circles of global crime, he was the head of the Moretti crime family, a syndicate he had inherited and ruthlessly transformed from a brutish street operation into a sophisticated, corporate-style international enterprise. He wasn't a thug. He was a strategist, a man who moved money and power with the chilling precision of a grandmaster playing chess with human lives. His brutality was the stuff of legend, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet, efficient, and absolute. Men who crossed Marco Moretti didn't get second chances. They simply ceased to exist. But in the penthouse suite, a sprawling two-story sanctuary of black marble, chrome, and priceless modern art that floated above the city's manufactured joy, the king was a prisoner. His throne room had become a state-of-the-art medical ward, and his absolute control had dissolved into the agonizing helplessness of a father watching his son die. 9-year-old Angelo Moretti, the sole heir to this glittering, violent empire, lay on a custom hospital bed, his small body withering. For 6 months, a mysterious, wasting sickness had been devouring him from the inside. His muscles were slowly atrophying, his body racked by episodes of excruciating, nerve-deep pain that left him limp and breathless. The world's leading specialists, flown in on private jets and paid fortunes for their ignorance, were baffled. They had no diagnosis, no treatment, and no hope. Marco stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city he owned, his hands clenched into fists in the pockets of his tailored Brioni suit. He could order a man's death with a subtle nod, shift global markets with a single phone call, but he couldn't stop the invisible enemy that was stealing his son's life. Breath by agonizing breath. The impotence was a physical sickness, a poison far worse than any his enemies could devise. "There's been no improvement, sir," said the lead specialist, a renowned geneticist from Stanford, his voice heavy with defeat. "His neuromuscular responses are degrading. We simply don't know what's causing it." "Then you are useless to me," Marco said, his voice as cold and flat as the glass he was staring through. "Have my security escort you to the airport. Your contract is terminated." He was burning through the world's best doctors, one failure at a time. As the defeated medical team packed their bags in silence, a different kind of professional was ascending the Onyx in a private velvet-lined elevator. Her name was Lena Petrova. In the exclusive word-of-mouth world she inhabited, she was known simply as the Muse. She was an artist, and her medium was the desires of powerful men. She was a high-class escort of the highest caliber, a creature of intellect, elegance, and profound discretion, whose nightly fee could buy a luxury car. She had been booked for the week by Marco Moretti's office for a client described only as a VIP associate in need of distraction. For Lena, it was just another job, a performance in the high-stakes theater of wealth and loneliness. She arrived at the penthouse, a vision in a simple but devastatingly elegant black dress, expecting to be greeted with champagne and strained conversation. Instead, she was met by a wall of tense, funereal silence. A man with the hard, watchful eyes of a wolf and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite stepped forward to greet her. "I'm Nico Gallo," he said, his voice a low growl. "Mr. Moretti's associate. There's been a change of plans." Before he could elaborate, a sound tore through the quiet opulence of the penthouse. It was a thin, ragged scream of pure, unadulterated agony, the sound of a child's nervous system being set on fire. Lena froze, her carefully constructed composure cracking. The sound was viscerally, horribly wrong. Nico's face tightened, a flicker of something unreadable, pain or perhaps annoyance in his eyes. Ignoring Nico's attempt to block her, Lena moved toward the source of the sound, an open doorway that led into the main living area. The scene inside stopped her heart. The hospital bed, the machines, the small boy writhing, his body contorting in a spasm of such violence it seemed his bones might break. His eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond pain. The doctors were gone. There was just Marco, standing frozen by the bed, and Nico, who had followed her in. But Lena saw more than just a medical crisis. Her mind, a repository of knowledge she had spent her entire adult life trying to suppress, saw a pattern. The specific way the boy's muscles seized, the faint, almost bluish tint to his lips, the slight but distinct odor of bitter almonds in the air. It was a triad of symptoms she recognized. It was a ghost from her past, rising from the grave of her father's disgraced legacy. Her father had been a brilliant, eccentric doctor in Russia, a biochemist who practiced a form of holistic, bioenergetic medicine. He believed that all diseases were rooted in toxins and that the body's electrical field held the key to diagnosis and healing. He had been mocked, discredited, and stripped of his license by the medical establishment. He had died a broken man, but not before teaching his daughter everything he knew, drilling the subtle signs of poisoning into her memory. "Get her out of here," Marco grated, his voice thick with grief and rage, not even looking at her. "His sickness isn't a sickness," Lena said, her voice cutting through the room, clear and sharp. "It's a poison, a slow-acting nerve agent." Both men turned to stare at her. Nico's face was a mask of suspicion. Marco's was a study in raw, dangerous disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" Marco demanded. "I'm the one who knows what's wrong with your son," Lena said, taking a step closer to the bed. "Your doctors are looking for a disease that doesn't exist. They're chasing a ghost. I'm looking at the murder weapon." She pointed a steady finger at the IV bag dripping a clear fluid into Angelo's arm. "It's in his supplements, in his hydration, a little bit every day." Angelo let out another choked cry as his breathing hitched, his diaphragm seizing. The respiratory monitor began to wail. "He's crashing," Nico said, reaching for a phone. "I'll call the house doctor back." "He'll be dead by the time he gets here," Lena snapped. "That poison paralyzes the muscles, all of them, including the ones he needs to breathe." She turned her full, blazing attention on Marco. "You are a man who takes risks, Mr. Moretti. I can see it in your eyes. You are about to lose everything. So I am offering you a final gamble. Give me 5 minutes. If I can't get him breathing again on his own, you can have your man put a bullet in my head. I won't even protest." It was an insane proposition, delivered with the absolute conviction of a prophet or a madwoman. Marco stared at her, his mind, a machine of logic and probability, struggling to compute this impossible variable. He looked at his son, whose face was turning a dusky blue. He looked at the screaming machines that represented the failure of all his power and wealth. Then he looked back at the strange, beautiful woman offering an impossible wager. He made the only choice a desperate man could. He nodded, just once. "Nico," Marco said, his voice a deadly whisper. "If he dies, she dies." Nico pulled a small, brutally efficient pistol from the small of his back, the metallic click echoing in the room. Lena ignored them both. She was in her father's world now. She moved to the bed, her expensive dress and perfectly styled hair a surreal contrast to the clinical urgency of her actions. She didn't touch the machines. She didn't reach for any medicine. She reached for the boy. "The body is an electrical circuit," she murmured, reciting her father's mantra. "Poison disrupts the signal. You must restore the primary current." She placed her thumbs on two specific points at the base of Angelo's neck, where the vagus nerve ran closest to the surface. She applied firm, steady pressure. Then, with her other hand, she began a series of sharp, rhythmic taps on his sternum, not to restart his heart, but to create a bioelectric vibration, a resonance designed to shake the paralyzed nerves of his diaphragm. It was a technique her father had developed, a strange fusion of Eastern acupressure and Western neurology. He had called it bioresonant stimulation. The Russian medical board had called it quackery. "1 minute," Marco's voice cut in. Angelo's body remained terrifyingly still, his lips now a deep, deathly blue. The respiratory monitor was a flat, unbroken line. "It's not working," Nico growled. "Shut up," Lena commanded, not looking up. She repositioned her hands, finding two new points along his spine, just below the shoulder blades. She applied a sharp, twisting pressure. It was a high-risk maneuver, designed to shock the phrenic nerve into firing. Suddenly, Angelo's body arched in a massive, violent spasm, then went completely limp. The last, faint beep of the heart monitor faded into a final, damning silence. Nico raised his gun, but Lena held up a hand, a gesture of absolute command. "Wait." And then, in the profound, deathly quiet of the room, came a sound. A small, weak, but unmistakable hiccup, followed by a shuddering, ragged gasp. Angelo was breathing. His small chest rose, then fell, then rose again, a slow, weak, but steady rhythm. The monitors, as if in disbelief, flickered back to life, beeping a hymn of resurrection. Color began to seep back into his face. His eyes, which had rolled back in his head, fluttered and then focused, hazy and confused, on Lena. Lena sagged against the bed, a wave of dizziness washing over her. She had won her wager. She looked up at Marco Moretti. The grief and rage in his eyes had been replaced by a look of stunning, terrifying intensity. It was the look of a man who had just seen a god, or a devil, and was now determined to own it. "The doors are locked," Marco said, his voice low and possessive. The sound of heavy bolts sliding into place echoed through the penthouse. "The elevators are disabled. You're not going anywhere. Not until you tell me everything." Lena looked at the pistol still in Nico's hand, at the cold, hard eyes of the Mafia boss, who was now her warden, and at the boy whose life she had just saved, and in doing so, had forfeited her own. The Onyx wasn't just a casino anymore. It was her cage. For the next 4 days, Lena lived in a state of luxurious, high-anxiety limbo. She was a prisoner in the most opulent jail on earth. Her suite was a study in black and gold, with silk sheets, a marble bathroom the size of her New York apartment, and a personal maid who anticipated her every need with silent, unnerving efficiency. But the windows didn't open, and a stoic, armed guard was perpetually stationed outside her door. Her agency had been informed that her client was so enamored, he had extended her contract indefinitely. A gilded cage was still a cage. Her time was divided into two distinct, surreal parts. The first part was her sessions with Marco. They took place in his stark, minimalist office, a room that felt more like an interrogation chamber than a billionaire's workspace. He questioned her relentlessly, his brilliant analytical mind picking apart her story, searching for inconsistencies, for the hidden angle he was sure existed. Bioresonance, nerve stimulation, he said during one session, his voice dripping with skepticism. It sounds like mysticism, Miss Petrova. Call it whatever you want, Lena replied coolly, refusing to be intimidated. She had learned early on that with men like Marco, fear was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. Your son is alive because of it. That is the only data point that should matter to you. She told him a carefully edited version of her father's story. The brilliant but ostracized doctor, his theories on toxicology, her reluctant apprenticeship. She gave him just enough truth to be plausible, wrapping the core of her esoteric knowledge in a language of science and biochemistry she knew he would respect. She was performing the most difficult role of her career, and her life depended on its success. The second, and far more genuine part of her life, was the time she spent with Angelo. The boy was recovering with a speed that was nothing short of miraculous. The pain was gone. The atrophy seemed to have halted. A quiet, intelligent boy, he had been raised in the sterile isolation of his father's world, starved for genuine warmth and connection. He latched onto Lena with a fierce devotion. They spent hours in the penthouse's private library, reading old adventure stories. He showed her the intricate Lego models he built, entire cities of astonishing detail. He was a lonely prince in a glass tower, and she was the first person who spoke to him not as an heir or a patient, but as a boy. It was during one of their reading sessions that he gave her the first crucial clue. Uncle Nico says I'm almost better, Angelo said, looking up from his book. He says I should start taking my special vitamins again soon to get my strength all the way back. Lena's posture stiffened. Special vitamins? The doctors didn't mention any special vitamins. Oh no, they're not from the doctors, Angelo said, his voice innocent. They're from Uncle Nico. He gets them from a special place. He says they're his secret weapon for staying strong. He blends them into my protein shake for me himself, so I don't forget. A cold, familiar dread washed over Lena. A separate regimen, controlled by one person, the loyal one, the trusted one. And how do these vitamins make you feel, sweetie? Lena asked, her voice carefully casual. Angelo shrugged his small shoulders. Tired and kinda achy, like my bones are sleepy. But Uncle Nico says that's just the medicine working. He says, no pain, no gain. No pain, no gain. The phrase, so innocuous from anyone else, sounded like a death sentence coming from the man who was Marco Moretti's right hand. The man who had raised his gun so readily, so eager to follow the order to kill her. She knew, with the chilling certainty of her father's paranoid teachings, that Nico Gallo was the source of the poison. But knowing and proving were two different worlds. Nico was Marco's shadow, his other half. He was family, in a way that blood couldn't define. To accuse Nico would be to accuse Marco himself of a catastrophic failure in judgment. It was an act of war she could not win without unassailable proof. Her prison, the Onyx, was also Nico's fortress. As Marco's consigliere and unofficial head of security, he controlled the eye in the sky, the most sophisticated surveillance system in the world. Thousands of hidden cameras watched every inch of the casino and the penthouse. Nico could see everything. To find proof, she would have to become a ghost in his own machine. She began her campaign that evening. She knew she couldn't beat the cameras, so she used them. During her escorted walks through the private floors of the casino, she made sure to accidentally bump into a young, handsome security technician named Ben, who monitored the penthouse feeds. She used the oldest tools in her arsenal: a dazzling smile, a flicker of feigned vulnerability, a hint of forbidden interest. "It must be so intense," she said to him one evening, her voice a low murmur. "Watching everything all the time. You must see so many secrets." Ben, a kid from the suburbs who was clearly starstruck and overwhelmed by her attention, blushed. "You get used to it. Mostly it's just watching rich people lose money." "But Mr. Gallo's office," she pressed gently. "That must be different. The nerve center. I bet that's where the real secrets are." "Oh, we can't see in there," Ben said, eager to impress her with his knowledge. "Mr. Gallo's office is on a closed circuit. The only person who can see that feed is Mr. Moretti himself. There's a blind spot, though," he added, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "The west corridor right by the service elevator. The camera glitches for about 30 seconds every 2 hours when the system reboots. Mr. Gallo is always complaining about it." A 30-second window. It was next to nothing, but it was a start. The next step was access. Nico's office was in the back of house, a labyrinth of secure corridors and biometric locks. She needed his fingerprint. Her opportunity came the next day. Marco, seeing how much Angelo had improved, had allowed the boy short, supervised trips down to the casino's private pool. Nico, ever the loyal protector, always came with them. Lena watched Nico as he sat by the pool, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, a glass of iced tea sweating on the table beside him. She accidentally stumbled while walking past, knocking the glass over, sending iced tea splashing across the table and Nico's hands. "Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy. I am so sorry," she gushed, grabbing a stack of napkins. As she frantically dabbed at his hands and the table, her movements were a flurry of practiced misdirection. While her right hand was wiping his, her left, hidden by the napkins, was pressing a small, thin square of putty, a material used by locksmiths for taking impressions, against the side of the glass he had just been holding. She captured a perfect, clear print of his thumb. It's fine," Nico said, his voice tight with irritation, pulling his hand away. He was annoyed, but not suspicious. She was just a clumsy, beautiful distraction. It was the role he had already assigned her. That night, Lena was ready. She had the knowledge of the blind spot. She had the fingerprint, which she had carefully transferred to a thin latex prosthetic she could wear over her own thumb. Now she just needed to get to the west corridor at the right time. At 2 a.m., when the casino was still humming but the private floors were quiet, she faked a panic attack, her cries and hyperventilating breaths echoing down the hallway. The guard outside her door, a burly ex-cop named Frank, rushed in. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I can't breathe," she gasped, clutching her chest. "It's this place. I'm trapped. I need air." Just for a minute. The service balcony at the end of the hall. Please." Frank, caught between his orders and the sight of a beautiful woman in distress, hesitated. 5 minutes, Frank," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. Tears she could summon on command. "I swear. Or you can stand right there and watch me have a complete breakdown. Your call." He relented. 5 minutes, and I'm watching you from the end of the hall." He escorted her down the corridor, the west corridor. Lena kept an eye on the small black dome of the security camera ahead. As they walked, she saw the tiny red indicator light on it blink, then go dark. The reboot. I just, I need a second, she said, leaning against the wall as if to steady herself, her body conveniently blocking Frank's view of the door to Nico's office. I'm so sorry to be a bother. It's okay, ma'am, Frank said, his voice softening. In those few precious seconds, she acted. With her back to him, she pulled the latex thumb over her own, pressed it to the biometric scanner, and turned the handle. The lock clicked open. She then leaned back against the wall, breathing deeply, as if recovering. Okay, she said after a moment. Okay, I think I'm better now. Thank you, Frank. She allowed him to walk her back to her suite. He had no idea she had just breached his fortress. An hour later, she slipped out of her room again, a shadow in the silent, opulent hallway. She returned to Nico's office, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She opened the door and stepped into the wolf's den. The office was dark, impeccably neat, and smelled of expensive cologne and power. She didn't turn on the lights, using only the faint glow from her phone. She went straight to the built-in cabinet behind his desk, where she had seen him take Angelo's supplements from. It was locked, a high-end digital lock. She didn't have time to crack it. She had to find what he used for Angelo's shakes. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a small, personal refrigerator tucked under the credenza. She opened it. Inside, amongst bottles of sparkling water and a few energy drinks, was a single, unlabeled, sealed container of a thick, grayish protein powder. It looked innocuous. But Lena knew the deadliest things often did. She took out a small, sterile sample bag she had taken from the medical suite. She carefully scooped a small amount of the powder into it. As she was sealing the bag, her eyes caught on something else in the back of the fridge, a small, lead-lined box, the kind used for transporting medical isotopes. It was completely out of place. Her curiosity overriding her caution, she pulled it out. It was heavy and cold to the touch. It wasn't locked. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in soft foam, was a single, small glass vial containing a few ounces of a clear, shimmering liquid. The label was in Portuguese, with a skull and crossbones symbol. Below it, a chemical formula she didn't recognize. But she recognized the supplier's logo, a notorious black market biotech lab operating out of Brazil, known for synthesizing poisons for assassins and intelligence agencies. This was it, the source. Far more potent and sophisticated than a simple plant-based toxin. This was professional. This was murder for hire, disguised as a family matter. She took a quick, clear photo of the vial. She had the powder sample. She had the picture of the source. She had everything. She was just placing the box back in the fridge when she heard it. The soft, electronic chime of the private elevator at the end of the hall. Someone was coming. It wasn't a guard. They used the stairs. It was Marco or Nico. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was trapped. She looked at the door. Too far. The windows overlooked a 1,000-foot drop. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on the heavy velvet curtains that covered one wall. She scrambled behind them, pressing herself flat against the cold wall, her body screaming with tension. She prayed it was Marco, heading to his own office. The office door swung open. Nico Gallo stepped inside, silhouetted by the hallway lights. He wasn't supposed to be here. His routine was absolute. Something was wrong. He walked to his desk and sat down, his back to her. He didn't turn on the main lights, only a small desk lamp, casting the room in long, dancing shadows. He picked up his phone and made a call. "It's done," he said, his voice a low, chilling murmur. "The transfer is complete. The rivals are in place. Yes, all of them." They think they're coming for a poker game, but it's an auction. The family is being carved up. No, he still doesn't suspect a thing. He's too busy playing house with the whore and his crippled son. Yes, tomorrow night will be the end of the Moretti line, and the beginning of mine. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't about making Marco strong again. This was a coup, a complete, hostile takeover. He wasn't just trying to remove the son. He was planning to eliminate the father, too, and sell the empire to their enemies. She had stumbled into a conspiracy far darker and more complex than she had ever imagined. And the proof she held in her hand, the powder, the photo, was suddenly terrifyingly inadequate. How could she prove a conversation she alone had heard? Nico ended his call and stood up. He walked toward the windows, toward the very curtains she was hiding behind. He reached out to draw them open, to look out at the city he was about to conquer. His fingers brushed against the heavy fabric, just inches from her face. The velvet was thick, but Lena could feel the pressure of Nico's fingers through the fabric, a phantom touch promising discovery and death. She held her breath until her lungs burned, her entire body rigid, a statue in the shadows. The rustle of the curtain was deafening in the silent room. Then, a soft chime from the desk. A new message had arrived on Nico's computer. His hand dropped from the curtain. He turned, a flicker of annoyance on his face, and walked back to the desk. Lena let out her breath in a silent, shuddering gasp, tasting the metallic tang of pure fear. She had been a heartbeat away from being found. Nico typed a quick reply, then, with a decisive air, he turned off the desk lamp and left the office, locking the door behind him. He hadn't seen her. Lena waited in the suffocating darkness for a full 10 minutes, her mind racing, replaying Nico's chilling words. The end of the Moretti line. The beginning of mine. This wasn't a misguided attempt to save Marco. It was a cold-blooded, absolute betrayal. The poker game was a trap, a stage for Marco's assassination. She finally slipped out of the office, a ghost in the hallowed halls of power, her mission having changed completely. It was no longer about saving Angelo. It was about saving them all. She went straight to Marco's office. He was there, as she knew he would be, awake and working, a specter surrounded by the glowing data streams of his empire. He looked up as she entered, his eyes sharp and questioning. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've seen something worse," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She walked to his desk and placed the small sample bag of gray powder on the polished surface. This was in a container in Nico's private refrigerator. It's what he's been putting in Angelo's shakes. She then showed him the photo on her phone of the vial from the lead-lined box. And this is the source, a custom-synthesized neurotoxin from a black market lab in Brazil. Marco stared at the evidence, his face unreadable, carved from stone. He zoomed in on the photo, his eyes tracing the chemical formula on the label. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. "This proves he had access to a poison," Marco said finally, his voice dangerously calm. "It does not prove he used it." "He confessed, Marco," Lena said, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. She recounted the entire phone conversation she had overheard. The auction, the rivals, the end of the Moretti line. As she spoke, she watched him, searching for a reaction. She saw none. His face was a perfect, impenetrable mask. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. "So," he said, his voice soft as silk. "My consigliere, my brother, The man who stood with me when our fathers were gunned down in the street is planning to murder me and my son and sell my empire to my enemies. And the proof of this grand conspiracy is the word of a prostitute I've known for less than a week, who happened to be hiding in his closet. The words were a slap in the face, cold, cruel, and dismissive. "You don't believe me," she whispered, a chilling realization dawning on her. "I believe you are intelligent and resourceful," Marco said, his eyes like chips of ice. "I believe you found what you were looking for, and I believe you have constructed a narrative that serves your own interests. Perhaps you want to replace Nico at my side. Perhaps you are working for one of my rivals yourself, and this is an elaborate attempt to destabilize my family. You think I would risk my life for what? Money?" she shot back, her voice rising with disbelief and fury. "You think Angelo's life is just a chess piece in a game?" "In my world," Marco said, standing up and walking to the window, "everything is a chess piece. Everyone has an angle." He looked out at the glittering city. "The poker game is tomorrow night. It is a delicate negotiation with the heads of the other families. A show of strength. Nico arranged it. It is critical that it proceeds without disruption." "It's a trap," Lena insisted, following him. "They're going to kill you." "If what you say is true," Marco said, turning to face her, "then Nico is a traitor, and I am walking into my own execution. And if what you say is false, you are a traitor, and you have just tried to poison my mind against the only man I trust on this earth." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the dim light. "Either way, one of you is going to die tomorrow night. I will find the truth, and I will handle it." He reached out and tilted her chin up with one finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Pray you are telling the truth, Lena, because my brand of justice is far less pleasant than a bullet." He turned and left the office, leaving her alone with the terrifying knowledge that she had given him the gun, but she had no idea which way he was going to point it. The next 24 hours were the longest of Lena's life. She was confined to her suite, the guard outside her door a constant reminder of her precarious position. She was a Cassandra, cursed to see the future, but powerless to stop it. Had Marco believed her, even a little? Or was he testing her, letting the trap spring to see who would be caught in it? The evening of the poker game arrived with a funereal calm. From her window, Lena could see a series of black, armored cars pulling up to the private entrance of the Onyx. The rivals were arriving. The jackals were gathering for the feast. At 10 p.m., her door opened. It wasn't a guard. It was Nico. He was dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, a dark, handsome angel of death. He smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marco requests your presence," he said. "He wants you to be the hostess for the game tonight. He says your beauty will be a welcome distraction." It was a test, or an execution. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If she refused, it would be an admission of guilt. If she went, she was walking into the epicenter of the conspiracy. "Of course," she said, her voice a smooth, silken lie. "I'd be delighted." She followed him to the private poker salon, a room of dark wood, green felt, and cigar smoke. 6 men sat around the table, their faces hard, their suits expensive. They were the kings of Las Vegas's underworld, the heads of the families who had been at war with the Morettis for generations. And sitting amongst them, laughing and sharing a drink with his sworn enemies, was Nico Gallo. Marco sat at the head of the table, his face an unreadable mask, a chip stack of black $100,000 plaques before him. He saw Lena enter, and his eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. There was nothing in them. No warning, no reassurance, nothing. "Gentlemen," Nico announced, spreading his arms wide, "our lovely hostess, Lena. Please make her feel welcome." The men's eyes roamed over her, cold and appraising. She felt like a prize piece of meat on an auction block. "A drink for our guests," Marco said, his voice calm. He gestured to a magnificent crystal decanter of what looked like priceless cognac on a nearby bar. Lena's mind raced. This was it, the moment of truth. She walked to the bar, her hands steady despite the tremor she felt deep inside. She had one last, desperate card to play. The small sample of poisoned powder was still in a hidden pocket in her dress. It wasn't enough to kill, but it was enough to create a symptom. A visible, undeniable symptom. As she poured the cognac, she positioned her body to shield her actions from the room. With a swift, practiced movement, she tapped the powder into one of the glasses. Not Nico's, but Marco's. It was the ultimate gamble. She was betting everything on one terrifying possibility, that Marco, despite his words, had believed her, that his cold, calculating mind had processed the data and seen the truth. She was poisoning him, just slightly, to save his life. If she was wrong, she had just signed her own death warrant and murdered the only man who might have protected her. She served the drinks, her face a mask of serene hospitality. She handed Marco his glass last. Their fingers brushed. His eyes met hers, and for an instant, she saw a flicker of something, an acknowledgement. He knew. He took the glass. "A toast," Marco said, raising it, "to new alliances, and to the end of old business." He drank. The game began. The mood was thick with unspoken tension. It wasn't a friendly game. It was a negotiation, with territories and operations as the stakes. Lena stood behind Marco's chair, a silent, beautiful statue. She watched Nico, who was becoming increasingly confident, his laughter a little too loud, his posture relaxed. He believed he had won. 20 minutes passed. Marco, who had been playing with his usual cold precision, suddenly faltered. His hand, reaching for his chips, trembled slightly. He brought it back, resting it in his lap, but Lena had seen it. So had Nico. A small, triumphant smile played on Nico's lips. He thought it was the beginning of the end. Marco put a hand to his chest, a slight grimace on his face. "Forgive me, gentlemen," he said, his voice a little strained. "A touch of indigestion." "Perhaps you are not feeling well, Marco," Nico said, his voice laced with false concern. "You look pale. Maybe you should rest." It was the cue, the signal for the other men to make their move. "No," Marco said, his voice suddenly clear and strong. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his gaze sweeping over the men at the table before landing, with the force of a physical blow, on Nico. "In fact, I've never felt better. Because the truth has a way of clarifying the system." He unbuttoned his jacket. Tucked into his waistband was not a gun, but a small medical auto-injector. "A fast-acting atropine compound," Marco said, holding it up for everyone to see. "An antidote for certain nerve agents. My personal physician has had me carrying it for the last 24 hours. Just in case." He looked directly at Lena. "Thank you for the warning," he said. The words a quiet confirmation that he had believed her all along. The color drained from Nico's face. The trap had been turned. "The cognac you're all drinking," Marco continued, his voice dangerously soft, "is clean. But the ice in Nico's glass was made from the same water he's been giving my son, laced with a little something extra to speed up the process." Nico looked down at his glass. then at his own hand, which had begun to shake uncontrollably. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. The muscular atrophy, the wasting sickness he had engineered for a child, was now, in a hyper-accelerated form, claiming him. "You!" Nico gasped, collapsing to the floor. "How?" "You got sloppy, Nico," Marco said, walking over to stand above him. "You got arrogant. You forgot the first rule. I am always 2 steps ahead." He looked at the other family heads, who were frozen in their seats. "This was a loyalty test, for all of you. You came here tonight to watch a lion be devoured by jackals." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "The jackal has been dealt with. Now, who wants to explain why you accepted the invitation?" The poker game was over. The executions were about to begin. And as Marco's men stepped out of the shadows, their weapons drawn, Lena knew she had just survived the most dangerous night of her life. But in the cold, merciless world of Marco Moretti, survival was a victory that had to be won again every single day. The poker salon, which moments before had been a theater of high-stakes negotiation, became a silent, efficient abattoir. The heads of the rival families, the would-be conquerors of Marco's empire, were swiftly and silently neutralized by Marco's loyal soldiers, who had been waiting in the surrounding rooms. It was a purge, executed with the brutal precision that had earned Marco his moniker, the Architect. He wasn't just a boss, he was a master of demolition and reconstruction. Through it all, Nico Gallo lay on the expensive carpet, his body twitching, the poison he had intended for a child now ravaging his own system. He was conscious, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief, forced to watch as the grand conspiracy he had orchestrated was dismantled piece by piece. Marco saved him for last. He dismissed his men, leaving only himself, Lena, and the traitor in the room. He walked over to Nico and knelt beside him, not with compassion, but with the cold curiosity of a scientist examining a failed experiment. "Why, Nico?" Marco asked, his voice a genuine, pained whisper. "Everything I had, I shared with you. I called you brother." Nico's lips twisted into a bloody sneer. "And I was always in your shadow. The hand, not the head. I built this with you. I took the risks. I buried the bodies. And what was my reward? To watch you go soft? To watch you sacrifice everything for a weak, sickly child?" He coughed, a racking, painful sound. "He was a flaw in the design, Marco. A bug in your perfect system. I was trying to fix it, to restore you." "You tried to murder my son," Marco said, the words falling like stones into a grave. "You broke the only rule that ever mattered." He stood up and looked at Lena. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She had not flinched. She had not looked away. She had borne witness to the savage heart of his world. "Take Angelo," Marco said to her, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Go to his room. Lock the door. And do not come out, no matter what you hear." Lena didn't hesitate. She turned and walked out of the room, the sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind her a final, definitive seal. She did not need to know what would happen to Nico. In this world, justice was not blind. It was personal, and it was absolute. She found Angelo asleep, his breathing soft and even. She sat in a chair by his bed, the silence of the penthouse now a heavy, oppressive blanket. An hour passed. Then she heard it. A single, muffled gunshot from the floor below. And then, nothing. The dawn that followed was gray and somber. The usual Vegas glitter muted by a sky the color of ash. Lena stood on the vast balcony of the penthouse, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The city below felt a million miles away. The glass door slid open, and Marco stepped out. He was still in his tuxedo from the night before, his bow tie undone, his face haggard. He looked like a king who had just survived a war by burning down his own castle. He stood beside her, not speaking, for a long time. "It's done," he said finally. "The organization is clean. The traitors have been removed." "And Nico?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Nico paid his debt," Marco said, his voice flat. He turned to her, and for the first time, the mask was gone. In his eyes, she saw not the brutal mob boss, but a man utterly, profoundly alone. Adrift in a world where trust had become an extinct commodity. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, Lena," he said. "You saved my son. You saved my life. You saved my empire." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim leather portfolio. "This contains the deeds to 3 penthouse apartments in New York, a villa in Lake Como, and a controlling interest in a luxury fashion brand. It also contains the access codes to a bank account with a balance of $50 million. New identity, passports, whatever you need. It's all yours. You can walk away from this life, from your old life. You can be whoever you want to be." It was an offer beyond fantasy. It was the keys to the world. It was a golden parachute from a life she had often despised. She looked at the portfolio, then back at his tired, empty eyes. She had played her part. She had won the game. All she had to do was collect her winnings and walk away. But as she looked at him, she didn't see a client. She saw a man as trapped in his cage as she had ever been in hers, and she thought of the small, sleeping boy in the other room, a boy who had lost his uncle, and whose father was a ghost haunting his own life. She gently pushed the portfolio back toward him. "No," she said softly. Marco stared at her, a deep, weary confusion in his eyes. "I don't understand. This is your freedom." "Is it?" she countered, her voice quiet but firm. "Or is it just a prettier cage? You live in a world of transactions, Marco. Everything has a price. You think you can pay me for what I did, so you can file it away as a debt settled and go back to being the man you were. But you can't." "Then what do you want from me?" he asked, his voice raw. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I want something for him." She nodded toward Angelo's room. "He's alive, yes, but he's not safe. Not from your world. Not from the memory of what happened. He needs something your money can't buy and your guns can't protect. He needs a buffer, a guardian, someone in his life who is completely outside the chain of command." She took a breath, laying her own terms on the table. "I will stay. Not as your employee, not as your mistress, not as anything you can name or own. I will stay as Angelo's advocate. I will oversee his education, his well-being. I will be the one person in his life who has no agenda other than his own. My price is not money. My price is his future, a future where he gets to be a child, not just an heir." It was an insane, audacious demand. She was asking to be embedded in the heart of his family, not as a subordinate, but as a separate, independent power. Marco looked at her, at the woman who had walked into his life as a commodity and was now demanding to be its conscience. He saw the strength, the intelligence, the unnerving courage that had saved them all. He had built his life on the principle that everyone could be bought. She was the one, impossible variable that proved his entire worldview wrong, and in that moment, he realized she was the most valuable asset he had ever encountered. "The west wing of the penthouse is self-contained," he said slowly, his mind already working, rebuilding. It has its own entrance, its own staff. It will be yours. You will have a budget without limits and autonomy without question. He paused, a new, unfamiliar light in his eyes. There is one condition. What is it? Lena asked, her guard still up. You will dine with us, he said. You, me, and Angelo, every night. No business, no guards, just family. The word hung in the air between them, strange and fragile, and full of a terrifying, hopeful weight. Lena looked at the brutal king of Las Vegas, the man who had just purged his own ranks without blinking, now asking, in his own way, for a chance at something real. Deal, she said. A month later, Lena sat on the edge of the stage in the Onyx's empty main showroom, watching Angelo take a piano lesson. The boy's fingers, once clumsy and weak, moved over the keys with a newfound confidence, filling the vast, silent theater with a simple, beautiful melody. She was no longer a performer, but a guardian. She was no longer for hire. She was essential. From the shadows of the back row, Marco watched them. He was still the architect, still the ruthless king of his domain. But he was also just a father, listening to his son play the piano. He would look up from his work and see Lena and Angelo reading in the library, or hear their laughter echoing from the pool, and feel a crack in the icy fortress he had built around his heart. He had invited a beautiful, dangerous stranger into his home for a week of distraction. He had not anticipated that she would stay for a lifetime, and in the process, tear down his world and rebuild it into something he had never known he wanted. A home. The Onyx was still a cage, but now, for the first time, it held the promise of not just power, but of a fragile, dangerous, and extraordinary hope.